I'm just gonna call you out right now. If you are a fan of Guilty Gear, the franchise, this may be a clear indicator to yourself or others that you are quote-unquote neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum. While it is true that Guilty Gear and fighting games as a whole do not exactly appeal to the entirety of the neurodivergent community, as tastes and interests vary, a wide majority of audiences who enjoy the gameplay, the lore, and the designs, and the writing behind each character just so happen to be on the spectrum. It's bright, fun, characters unique in style in such a way that they could only belong to Guilty Gear have become the obsessions or hyperfixations of, impressively, many a person. The power of autism. And with autistic fans come headcanons and proposals that characters are coded a specific way due to coincidentally sharing aspects of themselves that coincide with certain subtle behaviors. This does not only apply to neurodivergency, but mental conditions and disabilities, oftentimes bringing the community together and sharing similar tastes, and finding comfort in being on the level, so to speak. I have even befriended entire groups of people simply because we shared the same take, that so-and-so is autistic, a specific sexuality, gender, and would commit to activities or act a certain way unexplored in the canon storyline. Headcanons, even though they are just that, headcanons, then can mean the world, to people in ways sometimes unexplainable and always beautiful. In light of massive amounts of ableism and general hatred in online communities, people thrive on simply sharing information on the characters that they love. Not to mention the thrill of competitive gameplay and good sportsmanship. Autism headcanons can be applied to all the characters in the Guilty Gear roster, but this character in particular stands out the most in terms of autistic behaviors, mannerisms, and generally as a character, exuding dangerously high levels of raw autistic power. That's right, Bedman! I am probably the biggest Bedman fan in the world right now, actually, even though I don't necessarily talk about him anymore as seriously as I used to. He is, and always will be, a comfort character, and a joy to discuss with others. And as I am autistic myself with a dash of ADHD, I feel as if I speak for the rest of us when I say that holy shit, it's so obvious that he's neurodivergent, it's genuinely fucking hilarious. Bedman is a huge mystery, but what's not so much a mystery is his striking personality, his lightning-fast speech, and argumentativeness. Bedman's brain, running too fast for his body to process, cannot sustain itself when he's awake. Due to this, helped by the hyper-phantasic dream state he's locked in, what could be a short witty one-liner at the end of a battle or the start of it, or a conversation, turns into disorienting paragraphs, full-on one-sided conversations, and mathematically accurate disses. It's the equivalent of imagining a really good comeback while you're showering. They are belittling, and wow, they are mean. In each one, Bedman showcases his obvious distaste for undesirables, relying on the fact that he's won as a basis to say that he's right, and further flex his unwavering intelligence against what could have been his untimely demise. This is immediately contrasted by the fact that, despite hating undesirables, loads his many speeches with useless, over-explained information and over-complicated sentence structure. As an example, I will show off one of my personal favorites.
We talk about survival of the fittest a lot, but all that really means is the skilled live and the unskilled die. Since you're clearly in that second group, maybe pick your fights a bit more carefully. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's never going to matter how much you want it when you're up against someone who can kill you with a sneeze.
First, the opening line we talk about survival of the fittest a lot comes completely out of nowhere and could be taken from a completely different conversation. He sets up this line, taken from his own thought process, unrelated to the battle beforehand, and spins it around, creating this completely new, confusing context. Why would you bring up survival of the fittest? After this setup, only then does he connect it to the actual beatdown. The we pronoun at the beginning also helps the belittling factor, making his opponent seem excluded from a conversation that, according to Bedman, his opponent was involved in, therefore making them feel like a complete fucking idiot. The belittling is then furthered by the, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And then he decides to disprove the existence of hopes and dreams and the power of family and friendship by stating it's never going to matter how much his opponent wants to win, that it's impossible, and to give up. Okay. His power, the blessing/curse of unparalleled magic talent and identity, is utilized throughout his outro, in which he displays himself as a sort of haunting, televised to the opponent's mind. Majorly, it is a lot of information to process in the span of 10 or 15 or so talking seconds. This guy talks, like, a lot. Even Soul finds it annoying.
Entirely. Anyway, I detest long conversations. At least we agree on that.
So, how do these dialogues and all the other dialogues and also this specific winning quote correlate to all of his autism and autistic behaviors?
I will reprise the fact that Bedman relies heavily on what he can control and what information is tangible to him. He's connected to the fabric of existence, the backyard, so yeah, I'd say not knowing something outside of that is reasonably terrifying. Outside of these factors, or physical sciences as he puts it, anything and everything uncertain is lethal, literally unheard of. Autistic individuals oftentimes struggle with this exact problem: building routines, schedules, having safe foods, and expecting the familiar tonal cues in conversations, all to avoid deviating from a specific script or plan that they have in their heads. To ensure that Bedman is still able to enforce control over his opponents, he boasts, uses manipulative language as seen in the survival of the fittest speech, and makes a fool out of whoever desires to challenge him. He is incredibly skillful, prideful, and hates it when things don't go his way. Like an autistic person. Or, I don't know, someone like me. The anxiety of inevitably being beaten or unable to complete his quote-unquote tasks or get back to quote-unquote his work frustrates him to the point of a mental break. In a mirror match, if you defeat Bedman with his insta-kill, Theater of Pain, he repeats the irrational sequence of pi, used for circles, I think, I don't know, I didn't pass geometry, I'm sorry, blankly, as if it's the only certainty he knows, something to comfort him before he's finished off by witnessing his most painful memory. Or, perhaps, it's the circle he's witnessing, and thereby is the very thing that he's afraid of. A cycle. Or the circle. But really, it's all up to interpretation. The fact that his most painful memory is also related to the circle, or the cycle, as I mentioned, can also have something to do with Delilah and the pattern of revenge that she would inevitably be placed into upon his death, or if he were to die. In order to stop this, he wants to bring about his absolute world and, just bring everybody back to normal, and to have a better, safer, more peaceful, efficiently working world that he thinks is right. So, I guess in a way that also ties into him being autistic, because he wants everything to go his way, a certain sort of way, and if they don't, he's probably going to explode. Anyways. The specific pattern of behaviors can also be associated with traumatic events, being helpless in the previous state and never wanting to remember or go back to where he was before. Especially since Delilah, his only living blood relative, and the person who may just understand him the most, is on the line. Bedman is not only autistic, but also most likely mentally unwell, having been isolated from regular human contact and having a deep misunderstanding of how connection, friendship, and life realistically plays out. This is the only context and part of life in which Bedman doesn't understand, which is the root cause for his second motive, wanting to achieve normalcy, and transitions into another autistic symptom. After defeating Answer in a match, if you're playing as Bedman, he rolls out one of the longest end quotes in the entire game.
人はコミュニケーション手段として言葉を生み出し、高度な知性を証明した。しかし真に高度な知性とは言葉を必要とせず、誤解のない意思の疎通を可能せしめる能力だと思うんだ。要するに、不体的な説明を延々と語り並べることに長けている人種は対価に邁進してるという。そう、君のことだよ。
The symptom I'll be talking about is the lack of communication skills and the lack of sociability that comes with having autism, or the feeling of being lost and confused in everyday conversation. Bedman prioritizes nonverbal communication over verbal communication, labeling it superior over the necessary, unnecessary toils of verbal communication, like miscommunication and things like that, not really getting a joke or not understanding certain things. It's better to just not talk at all. Post-Revelator, his treatment towards the other characters in the roster becomes almost amicable in his own strange little way. He attempts to show sympathy for Raven and gives high-hued insights as to how he could defeat his own enemies efficiently by eliminating a lack of choice. He tells Dizzy to prepare so she is never faced with a scenario in which all is against her, and to not foolishly believe in the concept of heroism. And with other characters, he gives blunt advice on what makes the most sense. Keyword blunt. His inability to communicate casually or normally with others and exaggerated personality to hide a softer, different interior than the Bedman he presents as can be boiled down to the trouble with social skills autistic people have and a phenomenon known as masking. He doesn't mask traditionally as other people would mask. There's many different,
variations of masking depending on the people that you're around and how you feel you need to act in order to present yourself a certain way, and I will go into that right now. In terms of variation, we really hardly ever get to see a more humane side of him. We get glimpses during his inspiring dog-killing act of kindness and the giving purpose moment to Ramathal, and the heart-to-heart between him and Axel in the clock world, and the argument that he and Robokai had before his untimely death. Romeo, a genuine guy who loves his sister, desires what he concludes is a better world and a real, true friend, juxtaposing the cold, precise, power-hungry Bedman, a title bestowed onto himself as if to erase those aspects to appease a higher power, or to simply eradicate the emotions that got in the way of the absolute world's completion. Many people mask simply to fit in, as I said before, in situations where they may not be themselves, or where they may be in danger, or for professional opportunities or gatherings. This could also be an explanation as to why Bedman acts the way he does, being unable to show kinder colors in the face of pure evil, aka Ariel's, aka his boss. This could also just be a result of him acting the way that he does, but you know what, I'm trying to make points here, so whatever. His general tone when he talks, or the lack of empathy, and the incapacity to understand much of it, his monotone speaking voice, are also posed commonly as reasons for proposing Bedman as intentionally or unintentionally coded autistic. He's extremely unemotional at times. Most sentences are laced with satire or explanations with a vague tinge of melancholy or regret. It's kind of empty in a way. The simplicity of his clothing has been, as a stretch, associated with the tendency for autistic people to dislike certain clothing due to it having an uncomfortable texture, a tightness, or an itchiness. The open collar and hospital dress he wears is familiar and comfortable to him, even when given the freedom to change his form inside the space in his head connected to the backyard. None of these traits are bad or terrible in any way. It is simply a result of the world Bedman had been raised in, statistics, numbers, and pure logic with little to no room for emotion.
しかし貴様はよほどケツの穴が小さい社会に生まれたんだろうな。まるで余裕がない。隙もない。
There's a stereotype for autistic people that revolves around their actions or behavior seeming machine-like or computerized, dumbing them down to just that and only that. Many also recognize the disabled antagonist stereotype, but I feel as if Bedman is a lot more nuanced than just a simple antagonist. Bedman has a good amount of depth and development to curveball it, all the while playing on that exact villainized assumption and turning the viewer's expectations completely 360. We are, obligated to see past the machine, and past the evil done deeds, instead perceiving a character that was misunderstood and unloved, and didn't and still doesn't know how to process or act on those emotions properly, and who tried his hardest to quote-unquote save or revive the people he's murdered by realizing his absolute world. Combined with the rest of the major points on the docket, it's safe to say that Bedman is autism-coded, a lot like L from Death Note, fitting as Bedman's voice actor included a Death Note reference and a personal note, or Saki K. All are geniuses, psychics, and are kick-ass at their job, or just kick-ass at doing what they do, honestly, and yet they may very well struggle with neurotypicals in a very neurotypical majority world. Bedman, outside of autism, struggles with a once-mentioned curse that also counts as its own magical disability unique to the Guilty Gear world. Technically, the 8th generation reinforced high-density bed frame he sleeps on could count as his own mobility aid, as it's suited for teleportation, high-speed transportation, and a comfortable way for him to execute his plans flexibly and easily. Supposedly, it had 8 iterations beforehand, and I like to assume the past bed frames were to test the aforementioned abilities and to maximize the flexibility factor. Because seriously, that thing can bend, it can move, it crawls around like a spider. He also mentions that it's good to test out the bed in a passing voice line for a match, which is pretty funny. Many different revival alternate universes written by fans include Bedman, with having wheelchairs, canes, rollators, and different kinds of mobility aids, or modern alternatives to the mecha bed frame. Though I will not be speaking too much in this aspect as I am able-bodied, it's always good to see representation and realistic depictions of how he navigates after the bed has been retired from use. Viken, missing half of her sight in her arm, yet being able to shoot cannons and chains from crazy distances, is a similar implementation of ease of use, and there is no discouragement or obstacle that she cannot overcome as she utilizes her own lethally effective technique. Zato, or Eddie, is entirely blind, yet able to fight and see with his shadow demon and mentions seeing colors and lights of varying shades in different characters. All are characters that combat the fantasy ableism trope that many other stories or worlds incorporated to their own. They do not need to be cured, they are not helpless, and their stories and experiences, although harrowing, do not revolve entirely around their disability being tragic afflictions. Their own identity and character growth, and how they grapple with different traumas, is theirs to look back on. In conclusion, there are a variety of aspects that make Bedman such a relatable character to a select part of the Guilty Gear community, even some that I personally relate to. I'll never be as cool as him, but I do find his struggle with understanding others and speaking a bit weirdly to be relatable. I'm sure others find different aspects to be comforting and do their own spin on it. Fresher perspectives and stories are the best thing ever. If you think you know it all, you don't. There's probably someone out there cooking up the best iteration of Bedman you've ever heard of. Without headcanons like these and without a proper understanding of why and where they come from, discussions and critique on disability, physical or mental, in media or proper representation as a whole would likely not exist today.